Commander Civilis Kethron stood at the observation deck of the gladiatorial arena and watched the prisoners being dragged through the gates. Below her, silver scales caught the red light of Crucible Station's artificial sun as she pressed her clawed hands against the cold metal railing. Crucible Station was not a place for the weak or the kind-hearted, and Civilis had been neither for a very long time. It was a lawless trading hub that floated in the dead space between three empires. A place where criminals and warlords and slavers came to do business away from the eyes of civilization. The arena at its heart was where disputes were settled, where debts were paid in blood, and where the Valori Dominion sent its prisoners to die for entertainment. Civilis had watched hundreds of executions in this pit over the years. But today something felt different. Today they had brought a human. She narrowed her four eyes and leaned forward as the guards shoved the creature into the center of the arena. He was smaller than she expected, standing perhaps 6 feet tall, with pale skin and dark hair that fell across his forehead in messy strands. His hands were bound behind his back, and his body was covered in bruises and cuts from the interrogation sessions. The Dominion had captured him 3 weeks ago during a skirmish near the contested rim territories. His ship had been part of a small human convoy that strayed too close to Dominion space, and while the other vessels escaped, his had been damaged and taken. The intelligence officers had questioned him for days, but he had given them nothing useful. Not his name, not his rank, not the purpose of his mission. He simply sat in silence and stared at them with those strange round eyes that had no protective membrane, no second lid, nothing to shield them from dust or bright light. The officers had grown frustrated and recommended execution, and so here he was. The crowd around the arena was already roaring with excitement as they placed bets on how quickly the human would die. Civilis heard the numbers being called out. 30 seconds, 20 seconds, 10 seconds. No one bet on the human surviving even a minute. She could not blame them for their confidence. Humans were one of the younger species in the galaxy, having only achieved interstellar travel within the last 200 years. The Dominion's intelligence reports described them as soft and fragile creatures from a small blue planet at the edge of an unremarkable solar system. They had no natural armor, no claws worth mentioning, no venom glands or electrical organs or any of the countless weapons that evolution granted to proper predator species. Their only notable traits were an unusual persistence and a strange tendency to form emotional bonds with anything that moved, including other species that would happily eat them. The reports called them scavengers at best and prey animals at worst. Certainly nothing that could survive the arena. The guards removed the human's restraints and stepped back as the gate on the opposite side of the pit began to rise. With a grinding screech, Civilis felt her scales ripple with anticipation as she watched the darkness beyond the gate. They had chosen a Vraktharn berserker for this execution. The creature that emerged was 8 feet of pure nightmare, mass of black chitin and bulging muscle with 4 arms that ended in serrated claws capable of cutting through starship hull plating. Its mandibles clicked together hungrily as it caught the scent of fresh meat, and its compound eyes locked onto the human with predatory focus. The Vraktharn were a species bred for one purpose, and one purpose only. Worthy had served as shock troops for a dozen different empires before the Dominion conquered their homeworld and turned them into weapons a single berserker could tear through an entire squad of armored soldiers in seconds against one small unarmed human. It would be over before it truly began. Civilis watched the human as the Vraktharn stalked toward him. She expected to see fear, expected to see him tremble or cry or beg for mercy the way so many prisoners did when they faced death in the pit. But the human did none of these things. He simply rolled his shoulders cracked his neck, and settled into a strange stance with his weight balanced on the balls of his bare feet. His hands came up in front of him, open and relaxed, and his eyes tracked the Rakthorn's movements with unsettling calm. Something cold slithered through Civilis's chest as she realized what she was seeing. The human was not preparing to die, he was preparing to fight. The thought was absurd, and she almost laughed at the ridiculousness of I was half the size of the Rakthorn and had no weapons, no armor, no chance whatsoever. This was not courage. This was delusion born from the madness of despair. The horns sounded across the arena, signaling the start of the match. The Rakthorn let out a shrieking battle cry that made the walls tremble and charged forward with all forearms extended for the kill. The crowd screamed with bloodlust as the berserker closed the distance in 3 massive strides, and then the human did something that made Civilis's breath catch in her throat. He smiled. It was not the smile of a madman or a fool. It was the smile of someone who had been waiting for exactly this moment. The Rakthorn's first strike came down like a guillotine blade, aimed at splitting the human in half from skull to groin. The crowd was already cheering in anticipation of the kill. The human was not there. He had moved not backward, but forward, stepping into the arc of the attack rather than away from it. The serrated claw passed within inches of his body as he twisted sideways, and then he was past the Rakthorn's guard. Civilis's claws dug into the railing hard, enough to leave gouges in the metal. In her 200 years of military service, she had never seen anything move quite like that. It was not speed exactly. The human was not faster than the Rakthorn. It was something else. Something in the way he had read the attack before it even happened and positioned himself in the one place the claw could not reach. The crowd fell silent in confusion as the Rakthorn stumbled past its target and spun around with a screech of rage. The human had not even tried to strike back. During the opening, he simply reset his stance and watched the berserker with those calm, unreadable eyes. "What are you?" Civilis whispered to herself as she watched the impossible creature in the pit below. She did not know the answer yet, but she had a terrible feeling she was about to find out. The Rakthorn attacked again with a sweeping horizontal strike from 2 of its arms, while the other 2 came down from above in a crushing hammer blow. It was a killing pattern that Civilis had seen 100 times before, a combination that left no room for escape, except the human found room anyway, dropped low beneath the horizontal swipe and rolled forward through the narrow gap between the berserker's legs, coming up behind the creature before it could even turn around. His bare foot lashed out and connected with the back of the Rakthorn's knee joint, right where the chitin plates met in, and the armor was weakest. The berserker's leg buckled, and it stumbled forward with a shriek of surprise. More than pain, murmurs rippled through the crowd like wind. Through tall grass, Civilis felt her second eyelids flicker with shock as she processed what she had just witnessed. A human knew their anatomy. He had studied the Rakthorn and learned exactly where to strike to cause maximum damage with minimum force. This was not the desperate flailing of a cornered animal. This was the calculated precision of a trained predator. The berserker recovered quickly and spun around with all 4 arms slashing in a wild frenzy. The human danced backward, weaving between the strikes with movements that seemed to flow like water. He was not blocking the attacks, not trying to match the Rakthorn's superior strength. Instead, he was redirecting, guiding the creature's own momentum against itself, letting its massive power become a liability rather than an advantage. One of the claws caught him across the chest and opened a shallow cut that sent red blood spraying across the arena floor. The crowd roared with approval at the sight of first blood, but the human did not even flinch. He used the force of the impact to spin his body and drive his elbow into the nerve cluster beneath the Vrackthorn's primary mandible. The berserker's head snapped back, and its compound eyes went glassy for a split second. In that frozen moment of time, the human struck 3 more times, a palm strike to the throat, a knee to the midsection, and a 2-handed blow to the side of the creature's skull. The Vrackthorn staggered backward and shook its head as if trying to clear water from its ears. Green ichor dripped from a crack in its facial plates where the human's final strike had connected. Sivis could not believe what she was seeing. The human had damaged the berserker, not killed it, not even seriously injured it, but actually damaged a creature that was supposed to be invincible against unarmed opponents. She pulled up her tactical display and began recording the fight with trembling claws. The intelligence division needed to see this, needed to understand what they were dealing with. The Vrackthorn recovered from its momentary daze and let out a roar of pure fury that shook dust from the rafters. It had stopped treating the human as prey and started treating him as a genuine threat that made it even more dangerous. The berserker charged again, but this time it did not overcommit to single strikes. Instead, it used all 4 arms in a constant barrage of attacks, giving the human no time to breathe, no time to counterattack, no time to do anything but dodge and weave and retreat. Slowly but surely, the Vrackthorn was backing him toward the arena wall. Sivilis watched the human's face as the creature pressed its advantage and saw something that chilled her blood. He was not panicking, he was analyzing. Those strange round eyes were tracking every movement the Vrackthorn made, cataloging every pattern, measuring every distance. He was learning the berserker's fighting style in real time, absorbing data like a living computer. The human's back touched the arena wall, and the crowd erupted with cheers. The Vrackthorn drew back all 4 arms for a final devastating strike that would crush him into paste against the metal surface. And then the human did something impossible. He ran up the wall 3 steps, maybe 4, his bare feet finding traction on the vertical surface. Through sheer force and momentum, he pushed off at the apex of his climb and sailed over the Vrackthorn's head as its arms slammed into the wall hard enough to dent the reinforced metal. The human landed on the berserker's back and wrapped his arms around its throat in a chokehold. The Vrackthorn thrashed and screamed and tried to reach behind itself to grab him, but the human kept moving, shifting his position every time one of those massive claws came close. He was not trying to strangle the creature. The Vrackthorn's neck was too thick and armored for that. Instead, he was pressing down on specific points along its spine, applying pressure in ways that made the berserker's movements grow jerky and uncoordinated. Siv realized with growing horror that the human understood Vrackthorn neurology. He knew which clusters controlled which limbs, knew exactly how much pressure to apply to disrupt the signals between brain and body. This was not fighting. This was surgery performed with bare hands. The Vrackthorn finally managed to grab the human and tear him away from its back, throwing him across the arena with enough force to shatter bones. Human hit the ground hard and rolled several times before coming to a stop in a crumpled heap. The crowd roared with approval, certain that this was finally the end. But Civilis watched closely and saw the human's chest still rising and falling with ragged breaths. He was alive, more than alive. He was already moving, pushing himself up onto his hands and knees despite injuries that should have left him paralyzed. His left arm hung at an unnatural angle, clearly dislocated at the shoulder. Blood poured from a dozen cuts, and his ribs were almost certainly cracked. Any sane creature would have stayed down and accepted death. The human was apparently not sane. He gripped his own shoulder with his good hand, braced his feet against the ground, and wrenched the dislocated joint back into place with a sickening crack that echoed through the suddenly silent arena. He did not scream. He barely flinched as Civilis felt her hearts hammering against her chest as she watched the impossible creature rise to his feet once more. The Vrakthern was breathing heavily now, green ichor leaking from multiple wounds that the human had somehow inflicted during the fight. It was not used to prey that fought back, not used to battles that lasted this long. The human settled into his fighting stance again, his broken body swaying slightly, but his eyes still sharp and focused. Blood dripped from his chin and splattered on the arena floor in a steady rhythm. "What are you?" the Vrakthern hissed in its guttural language. The first words it had spoken since the fight began. The human smiled, that same terrible smile from before. "I am having a very bad day," he said in accented but understandable Galactic common, and then he attacked, not defended, not evaded, not waited for the berserker to come to him. He attacked. The human closed the distance between them in 3 quick steps and launched himself at the Vrakthern with complete abandon. Every strike he threw was aimed at a weak point, every movement designed to cause maximum pain with minimum energy. He fought like something that had forgotten how to be afraid, something that had decided that death was simply not an option it was willing to consider. The Vrakthern tried to defend itself, tried to use its superior size and strength to crush this annoying pest once and for all, but the human would not stop. No matter how many times the berserker hit him, no matter how much blood he lost, no matter how many bones cracked under the impact of those massive claws, he would not stop. Civilis watched the impossible battle unfold with growing dread as she finally began to understand what humans truly were. They were not the weak, fragile prey animals the intelligence reports described. They were something far worse. They were survivors. 7 minutes. The fight lasted 7 minutes and 32 seconds according to Civilis's tactical display. It was the longest arena battle in Crucible Station's recorded history. When it was finally over, the Vrakthern lay broken on the blood-soaked ground with its chitin cracked in a dozen places and its limbs bent at angles that would never heal properly. It still breathed, but barely. The arena medics would later determine that the human had systematically destroyed every major nerve cluster in the creature's body, leaving it alive but paralyzed from the neck down. He had not killed it, because killing it would have been merciful. The human stood over his fallen opponent, with his chest heaving and his body covered in wounds that would have killed any other species. 3 times over his left eye was swollen shut, and blood poured from a gash on his forehead that had turned his face into a crimson mask. 3 of his ribs were visibly broken, pushing against the skin of his chest in ways that made Civilis wince just to look at end. Yet he was still standing. The arena was completely silent for the first time in living memory. 30,000 spectators from 100 different species sat in stunned disbelief as they tried to process what they had just witnessed. The Vrakthern berserkers were supposed to be unstoppable. They were the ultimate warriors, the perfect killing machines, the nightmares that haunted a dozen conquered worlds, and this one had just been defeated by a single unarmed human who was half its size and possessed none of its natural weapons. The human swayed on his feet and looked up at the observation deck where Civilis stood. His one good eye found her through the crowd as if he had known exactly where she was. Watching from, there was no triumph in his gaze, no joy at his victory, just exhaustion and pain and something else that Civilis could not quite identify. It almost looked like sadness. Then his legs buckled and he collapsed face first onto the arena floor. The crowd finally erupted into chaos as people screamed and shouted and demanded answers to questions no one could answer. Civilis watched the medical teams rush into the pit and begin working on the fallen human with frantic urgency. She should have let him die. That would have been the smart thing to do, the safe thing to do, but she had already transmitted a command to the medical staff through her tactical display Sci-Fi. She needed to understand what she had just witnessed, needed to know how such a fragile creature could accomplish something so utterly impossible. The human was taken to the station's medical bay under heavy guard while civilists retreated to her private quarters and began digging through every classified file she could access. The intelligence reports on humans suddenly seemed woefully inadequate. She needed more, needed to understand the species that had produced this singular, impossible warrior. What she found made her scales turn pale with fear. Humans came from a world called Earth, a planet that the Galactic surveys had classified as a Class 12 death world. The classification meant nothing to most species, because anything above Class 10 was considered uninhabitable. Earth was a planet of extremes where the temperature could swing from freezing cold to burning heat within the span of hours. Its atmosphere was corrosive. Its water was filled with salt and parasites, and its surface was constantly ravaged by storms and earthquakes and volcanic eruptions. Planet was home to millions of species that had evolved specifically to kill each other in increasingly creative ways. There were creatures that injected venom capable of stopping hearts, creatures that could crush bones with a single bite, creatures that hunted in packs with intelligence that bordered on sapient, and the humans had outcompeted all of them. They had climbed to the top of the food chain on a world designed to kill them through nothing but persistence and adaptability. Civilis read about something called persistence hunting, where early humans would chase prey animals for hours or even days until the creatures simply collapsed from exhaustion. She read about their ability to recover from injuries that would kill other species, their capacity to continue functioning even after losing limbs or organs. She read about their strange social structures, their pack-bonding instincts, their willingness to die for members of their group without hesitation. But the thing that frightened her most was what she read about their history. Humans had been waging war against each other for their entire existence. They had developed weapons capable of destroying cities, poisons capable of killing millions, strategies and tactics refined through countless generations of bloodshed. Every human alive carried the genetic legacy of ancestors who had survived the most brutal selection process in the known galaxy. The weak had died, the strong had bred, and the result was a species that treated violence as casually as breathing. The human in the medical bay was not special. He was not some unique specimen or genetic anomaly. He was average. That thought kept Civilis awake for the next 3 nights. She returned to the medical bay repeatedly to observe the human's recovery with growing unease. The doctors had expected him to die within hours of arriving. His injuries were catastrophic by any medical standard: internal bleeding, organ damage, bone fractures, a skull crack that should have left him brain dead. Instead, he was healing, not quickly by human standards, according to the medical texts, but far faster than any Valori could have managed without extensive cybernetic intervention. By the 3rd day, he was conscious and alert. By the 5th day, he was sitting up and eating solid food. By the 7th day, he was doing something the doctors called exercise in his bed, moving his healing limbs through patterns designed to restore strength and flexibility. Liz watched through the observation window as the human performed these strange rituals with methodical patience. His face was still a mess of bruises and healing cuts, but his one good eye had regained its sharpness. She found herself wondering what he was thinking. What calculations were running through that alien brain? Did he know how Close he had come to death. Did he care on the 10th day she finally worked up the courage to enter his room? The guards tensed as she approached, but she waved them away and stepped through the door alone. The human watched her with calm interest as she crossed the room and stood at the foot of his bed. He was smaller than she remembered now that he was not fighting for his life. His frame lean and wiry rather than muscular. Up close, she could see the scars that covered his body. Old wounds from battles that had nothing to do with the arena. Commander Civilis Catherine, she said, by way of introduction. The Lori Dominion Intelligence Division. The human studied her for a long moment before responding. You can call me Cole, he said in that same accented galactic common. Is that your name or a title? It is what people call me. Civilis felt her scales ripple with frustration at the non-answer, but forced herself to remain calm. You killed a Vrakthan berserker with your bare hands, she said. Our intelligence suggested that humans were not capable of such feats. Cole's lips twitched in something that might have been amusement. Your intelligence was wrong. Clearly, Civilis agreed. I want to know how. The human tilted his head slightly as he considered her question. How what? He asked. How did I win, or how are humans capable of winning? Both. Cole was silent for a long moment, his strange round eyes studying her face as if searching for something. Then he spoke in a quiet voice that carried more weight than any shout. We do not know how to give up, he said simply. It is not in our nature to stop fighting while we are still breathing. Civilis stared at him and felt the cold certainty of fear settling into her bones. She had wanted answers. She had gotten them, and now she wished more than anything that she could forget what she had learned. The Dominion High Command decided not to execute Cole. He was too valuable now. Too interesting. Too full of secrets that needed to be extracted and studied. They transferred him from the medical bay to an isolation cell deep in the secure section of Crucible Station where the most dangerous prisoners were kept. The cell was designed to hold creatures far stronger and more deadly than any human, with walls thick enough to stop plasma fire and restraints capable of binding a Vrakthan Cole. Sat in the corner of this impenetrable prison and watched. The door with patient eye Civilis observed through the security monitors as the scientists came to study him. The first was a Valori geneticist named Dr. Krell, who specialized in xenobiology and had written extensively about the inferiority of mammalian species. She entered the cell with 3 armed guards and a case full of sampling equipment. Cole cooperated without resistance as she took blood samples and tissue scrapings and neural readings. He answered her questions about human biology with polite detachment, explaining concepts like adrenaline and endorphins and the fight or flight response. Dr. Krell left the cell 2 hours later with her samples and her data. She submitted her resignation the following morning without explanation and booked passage on the first transport. Leaving Crucible Station, Civilis intercepted her at the docking bay and demanded to know what had happened. The geneticist stared at her with haunted eyes and spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. He asked me about my children, she said. He knew I had children because of the way I held the sampling tools, the care I took not to cause unnecessary pain, and, Civilis pressed, he asked me what I would do if someone took them from me. If someone put them in a cell and ran experiments on them. Dr. Krell shuddered and pulled her coat tighter around her shoulders. The way he asked it was not a threat, she continued. It was curiosity, genuine curiosity about how other species form attachments. That does not explain why you are leaving. The geneticist looked at Civilis with something like pity in her eyes. He told me about his daughter, she said. She is 8 years old, and she likes to collect rocks from different planets. And every time he travels somewhere new, he brings one back for her. I fail to see. He showed me a picture. Krell interrupted. He has it memorized, every detail, every color, the exact shade of her eyes, and the precise curl of her hair. And he recreated it for me using the drawing tools in the cell's entertainment system. A voice cracked as she continued. Then he told me very calmly that if he does not return home, there will be people who come looking for him. People who will not stop until they find out what happened. People who will tear this station apart, molecule by molecule, to get answers. Threats, Civilist said dismissively. Empty threats from a prisoner with no power. Dr. Krell shook her head slowly. That is the thing, Commander. He was not threatening me. He was warning me. Trying to give me a chance to leave before it happens. She turned and walked toward the waiting transport without looking back. I suggest you take the same warning seriously. The second scientist was a neural specialist who wanted to understand how human brains process pain and fear. He lasted 4 hours in the cell before requesting immediate psychiatric leave. He would not tell anyone what Cole had said to him, only that he needed to reconsider some fundamental assumptions. About the nature of consciousness, the third scientist was a weapons expert who wanted to analyze the fighting style Cole had used in the arena. She spent 3 days interviewing him about human martial arts and combat techniques, recording everything he was willing to share. On the 4th day, she submitted a report to Dominion High Command that was immediately classified at the highest level. Civilist used her intelligence clearance to access it anyway. The report described in clinical detail how humans had developed hundreds of distinct fighting systems over thousands of years, each one designed to compensate for their physical weakness compared to other predators. They had styles that used an opponent's strength against them, styles that targeted weak points and pressure points, styles designed for one-on-one combat, and styles designed for fighting multiple opponents. Simultaneously, the weapons expert concluded her report with a single recommendation written in bold text: do not engage human military forces in ground combat. Under any circumstances. Civilist read the report 3 times and felt her certainty crumbling. With each pass, she had always believed that the Valori Dominion was the dominant power in this region of space, that their military might was unmatched, and their empire would endure for millennia now. She was beginning to wonder if she had been wrong about everything. The messages started arriving 2 weeks after Cole's capture. They appeared on every communication channel simultaneously, cutting through encryption and jamming and every defensive measure. The station's technicians could deploy the same phrase, repeated in every language the translation systems recognized. Return what is ours. Civilists traced the signals to their source and found nothing. Just empty space at the edge of the sector where no ships were supposed to be. But when she enhanced the sensor data, she detected ghost signatures, tiny anomalies that suggested vessels running on minimal power with their signatures masked. That humans were watching. They had found Crucible Station somehow, had tracked their missing soldier across light years of hostile space. And now they were waiting. Zivlis brought her findings to the station commander, a pompous Valori noble who had gotten his position through political connections rather than merit. The Valori noble who had gotten his position through political connections rather than merit. He dismissed her concerns with a wave of his clawed hand. One human, he sneered. They would not risk war with the Dominion for one prisoner. You do not understand, Civilist tried to explain. Humans are pack-bonded. They do not abandon their own. They are soft, the commander interrupted. They are weak. They are prey animals pretending to be predators. And I will not be intimidated by their pathetic attempts at psychological warfare. He ordered the communication channels jammed and the sensor data classified. He was still laughing about human arrogance when the station's lights went out. The attack came not with fleets or bombardment, but with silence. One moment the station was functioning normally. The next, every system crashed simultaneously as something burrowed through their cybersecurity. Like it was not even there, emergency lighting kicked in after 30 seconds, bathing the corridors in dim red. By then the humans were already inside. Civilists watched the security feeds with growing horror as 8 figures in black armor moved through the station like ghosts. They did not fire their weapons unless absolutely necessary, preferring instead to disable guards with precise strikes that left them unconscious but alive. It was terrifyingly familiar. The same kind of targeted violence she had witnessed in the arena. The same knowledge of anatomy and weak points, applied with surgical precision. These humans fought like Cole's. Humans moved like Cole's. Humans were clearly trained by the same people who had trained Cole, and there were 8 of them. The station security forces tried to mount a defense, but it was like trying to stop water with a net. The humans flowed around every obstacle, adapted to every tactic, exploited every weakness in the station's defenses with practiced ease. They moved as a single unit despite being spread across multiple decks, coordinating without visible communication, as if they shared a single mind. Civilist realized with cold clarity that she was watching something no Dominion officer had ever seen before. She was watching humans hunt, and Crucible Station was the prey. The security teams fell one by one, disabled but not killed, left in neat rows along the corridors as the humans advanced toward the detention level. Civilists could have called for reinforcements, could have tried to rally the remaining guards for a final stand. Instead, she made a different choice. She went to the isolation cell alone. Cole was waiting for her when she arrived, standing in the center of his prison with that same patient expression he always wore. "They are coming for you," she said. "I know. I could kill you now. Deny them their objective." Cole tilted his head slightly as he considered her words. "You could," he agreed. "But you will not." "How can you be so certain?" "Because you are curious," he said. "You want to understand us, want to know why we are the way we are. And you cannot do that if I am dead." Civilis stared at this impossible creature and felt her certainty collapsing into dust. "What do you want?" she asked. "What do any of you want?" Cole smiled, that same smile from the arena, the one that promised violence and patience in equal measure. "We want to go home," he said simply. "We want to return to our families and our lives and forget this place ever existed." He stepped closer to the energy barrier that separated them. "Let us leave and you will never see us again. Try to stop us," and he did not finish the sentence. He did not need to. The message behind his words was clear enough. Civilis entered the activation code and watched the barrier flicker and die outside. She could hear the sounds of fighting drawing closer, the crack of weapons fire and the thud of bodies hitting the floor. The humans were almost here. She stepped aside and let Cole walk past her toward freedom. "Why?" he asked, pausing at the door. "Why let me go?" Civilis looked at him with 4 eyes that had seen too much and understood too little. "Because I'm tired of being wrong," she said. Cole nodded once and disappeared into the corridor. 20 minutes later, the humans were gone, vanished back into the void as silently as they had arrived. They took nothing but their salty. The station commander blamed Civilis for the escape. He stood in the command center with his scales flushed dark with rage and accused her of treason, of collaboration, of deliberately sabotaging the Dominion's efforts to contain the human threat. Civilis listened to his accusations without expression and waited for him to finish. When he finally ran out of breath, she pulled up the security recordings from the detention level and projected them onto the main display. The footage showed 8 human soldiers cutting through the station's defenses like they were made of paper it showed guards with decades of combat experience being disabled in seconds by opponents who seemed to know their every weakness. It showed a coordinated assault so precise and so devastating that it might as well have been choreographed. "You want to know why I released the prisoner?" Civilis said calmly as the recording played. "Watch this footage and tell me that trying to stop them would have accomplished anything except getting more of our people killed." The commander sputtered and raged, but he had no counter to the evidence in front of his eyes. The humans had made it clear that they could have destroyed Crucible Station if they wanted to. They had chosen mercy instead, had limited their violence to the minimum necessary to accomplish their objective. That restraint was somehow more terrifying than any massacre would have been. Suggested confidence. Suggested that they did not consider the Dominion a threat worth eliminating. Suggested that they were saving their true capabilities for a situation that actually required them. The inquiry board ultimately sided with Civilis, ruling that her actions had prevented unnecessary casualties and preserved the station's infrastructure. The commander was quietly reassigned to a minor outpost in the outer territories where his incompetence could not cause any more damage. Civilis was promoted to senior intelligence analyst and given access to classified files that she had only heard rumors about before. She spent the following months studying everything the Dominion had ever learned about humans, from first contact reports to intercepted communications to biological samples taken from captured soldiers. The more she learned, the more her fear deepened. Humans were not just persistent, they were relentless. Their history was a catalog of extinction events that they had somehow survived through sheer stubborn refusal to die. They had endured ice ages and plagues and asteroid impacts and countless wars against each other, each disaster making the survivors stronger and more adaptable than before. They had spread across their planet and then beyond it, driven by insatiable curiosity that refused to accept limits. They formed bonds with other species as easily as breathing, turning potential predators into allies through patience and kindness and food. The reports called this tendency domestication and described how humans had done it to wolves and cats and horses and dozens of other creatures that should have been their natural enemy. Civilis read about human soldiers who had adopted local fauna on alien worlds, forming pack bonds with creatures they had known for only weeks. She read about rescue missions launched at impossible odds to save a single life, about entire fleets mobilizing because one ship sent a distress signal. She read about a phenomenon called found family, where humans would form connections as strong as blood ties with individuals they had no genetic relationship to whatsoever. And she began to understand why Cole had been so certain that his people would come for him. To humans there was no such thing as an acceptable loss. Every life mattered. Every person was worth fighting for. Every member of the pack was precious beyond measure. It was a weakness by Dominion standards, a vulnerability that could be exploited, but it was also a strength that the Dominion had utterly failed to account for. 6 months after the Crucible Station incident, Civilis submitted a comprehensive report to the Dominion High Council recommending an immediate cessation of hostilities with human territories. She outlined in exhaustive detail why continued aggression would ultimately end in disaster for the Dominion. She described human military capabilities, their technological adaptability, their willingness to accept casualties that would break any other species. She warned that the humans they had encountered so far were civilians and explorers, not soldiers, and that provoking a genuine military response would be catastrophic. The High Council read her report and laughed. They called her a coward, called her report fear-mongering propaganda, called her warnings the hysterical ravings of an officer who had lost her nerve. They pointed to the Dominion's superior numbers and firepower and declared that no species of soft-skinned primates could possibly threaten their empire. They ordered increased patrols along the human borders and approved several new research facilities designed to capture and study human subjects. Ivlis watched them sign the orders. With growing despair, she tried one more time to make them understand, pulling up holographic displays of human history, their wars, their weapons, the sheer scale of violence they had inflicted on each other over the millennia. "Look at them," she pleaded. "Look at what they did to themselves. Imagine what they will do to us if we give them a reason." The council members glanced at the displays with bored expressions and waved her away. "Primitive aggression," one of them said dismissively. "They are children playing with fire, nothing more. We will teach them their place in the galactic order." Another added with a cruel smile. Silas left the council chambers knowing that she had failed. She spent the following weeks putting her affairs in order, transferring her assets to secure accounts, sending encrypted messages to family members, warning them to stay far from the border territories. Then, she requested a transfer to the most remote outpost she could find, a sensor station at the edge of explored space where nothing ever happened. She told herself it was strategic positioning, that she needed to be far from the coming storm to survive it, but the truth was simpler than that. She was running away. The human response came 18 months later. It started small. So small that the Dominion barely noticed a patrol ship went missing near the rim territories. Then another, then 3 more in rapid succession. Supply convoys began reporting strange sensor contacts that vanished before they could be properly scanned. Communication buoys started failing in patterns that looked almost deliberate. Then the attacks began. Human fleets appeared at the borders of Dominion space, not in scattered raiding parties, but in organized formations that spoke of careful planning and coordinated strategy. They struck military installations with surgical precision, disabling defenses and capturing personnel without unnecessary casualties. They released their prisoners afterward, sending them back to Dominion worlds with stories of their captivity. The stories were all the same. The humans had been polite, even kind, treating their captives with respect and providing medical care for any injuries sustained during capture. They had asked questions about Dominion military capabilities and political structure, questions that the prisoners had answered because refusing seemed pointless, when the humans clearly already knew most of the information they were asking for. And at the end of each interrogation, the humans had delivered the same message: tell your leaders that this is a warning. Tell them we do not want war. Tell them that all we ask is to be left alone. Tell them what happens if they refuse. The Dominion did not listen. They sent their fleets to crush the human incursion, confident in their superior numbers and technology. Battle of the Veiled Nebula lasted 6 hours and ended with the largest military defeat in Dominion history. Human ships danced through the chaos with impossible coordination, exploiting weaknesses that should not have existed, adapting to Dominion tactics faster than the admirals could change them. When it was over, half the Dominion fleet was destroyed or disabled, and the survivors were retreating in disarray. The humans did not pursue. They held their positions at the edge of Dominion space and waited. Siveless heard the news at her remote outpost and felt nothing but tired resignation. She had tried to warn them. She had tried to make them understand, and now everything she had predicted was coming true. A month after the battle, a diplomatic vessel arrived at her station carrying a summons from the newly formed Dominion Transition Council. The old High Council had been dissolved following the disaster. Their members arrested or exiled or quietly disappeared, depending on who you asked. The new leadership wanted Civilis to return to the capital. They wanted her to lead something called the Human Relations Division. They wanted her to find a way to make peace with the species they had so badly underestimatedly accepted the position and began the long journey back to the heart of Dominion space. On the way, she drafted her first official recommendation to the new council. It was a simple document, just a few pages long, containing the intelligence assessment she had submitted years earlier. With one addition, at the bottom of the final page she wrote the words she had whispered to herself on Crucible Station as she watched Cole walk away to freedom. They were never the prey. The document concluded. We always were, and the sooner we accept that truth, the sooner we can begin to build something better than the ashes of our arrogance. She signed her name and sent the document to the council archives. Then she began planning for the negotiations that would shape the future of two species. Somewhere out there among them, stars, Cole was probably doing the same thing, preparing for peace instead of war.